Rouse's Markets is voted best grocery store in New Orleans, best grocery store in Baton Rouge, Mississippi, Gulf Coast, Thibodeau, Houma, Hammond, Lake Charles, Mobile, year after year. Thank you for choosing us best grocery store on the Gulf Coast. Number one. Thank you.
Thank you.
The number one grocery store
In Mississippi, Alabama,
Louisiana. 1 million customers a week can't be wrong. Welcome to Rouse's.
All right, it's another session of Good Vibes. I'm Martin Falls. These are turning into pretty good sessions, if you ask me. Joining us, the wonderful Debbie Cox-DeNova. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
All right, we're going to talk today about raising emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Can't wait to hear this. How do we do that?
When we think of intelligence, what most of us think about is the IQ, right? The overall mental intelligence. What research is showing is actually emotional intelligence is much more important to your success in life. And IQ tends to stay the same throughout life, whereas emotional intelligence is actually learned and learnable. So this is really important because what research has shown is that after you actually land a job, your emotional intelligence actually determines the success of you moving forward in life far more than IQ does. And so it's a really important thing. This research comes from Daniel Goleman, who is a renowned psychologist and an author of 6 books about emotional intelligence. And he basically tells a story about a New York hot day. One day, a hot, very sweltering day in New York. And he said he was walking around, he was going to catch a bus, and everybody was sort of in their leave me alone bubble, right? It's hot, don't get too close to me, including him.
That's every day in New York.
Right. So he gets on this bus, and the first thing that he noticed is he was kind of snapped out of his little bubble because the bus driver, in a very friendly way, said, "Welcome to the bus. How's your day going today?" And Goleman said he looked at this man and he said, "It's going great." And then he sat down on the bus. And what he noticed throughout the bus ride is that this bus driver was actually having engaging conversations with each person that got onto his bus. He was asking them about their job. He was asking them about how things were going at home. And what he noted was that while everyone walked onto the bus in their little leave me alone bubble, everyone who got off the bus were actually in an elevated mode. It was almost magical, he said. Years later, Daniel Goleman is opening up the newspaper, and there's the bus driver in an article in the New York Times talking about how this bus driver, whose name happened to be Govan Brown, ended up having a fan base, and people would wait to get on his bus. He had 3,000 letters, no complaints whatsoever, everyone praising him. And when they did the article, what they found out was that Govan Brown was actually a pastor. And his mindset was that when he went to work, that the people who got onto his bus were an actual extended part of the flock. And so it was his duty to actually minister to them with his energy, basically, every time they got on the bus. And what that got him over a very short period of time was that while other bus drivers had a goal to get people from point A to point B and they were just doing their job, Govan Brown's emotional intelligence and his ability to sort of broaden his purpose and really do a fantastic job at it made it so that he was such an important figure in New York that people were actually wanting to make contact with him on a regular basis. The power of emotional intelligence goes far beyond what we have been taught. In fact, it actually will affect your ability if you don't have they've done studies where they found that when the emotional part of the brain is numbed out, it actually harms your ability to have critical thinking, good critical thinking skills as well. So it bleeds over into your overall intelligence quotient. And what it comes down to, and again, as a reminder, if you feel that you may be lacking in this area or you may have some work to do, that's really great, because the very first order of business, if you're trying to raise your emotional intelligence, is being honest about how you perform in 4 specific domains of emotional intelligence. And so if you're at home, I encourage you at this point to grab a piece of paper and a pen and write these things down for yourself and really honestly rate yourself about how well you're doing in these 4 categories. So the first category is self-awareness. And self-awareness is one of these things that research shows that if you are low in self-awareness, you're likely not going to be doing well in any of the other domains as well.
Self-awareness as compared to like self-esteem.
Correct. Self-awareness is about knowing what your triggers are, knowing what actually causes a reaction within you, and what that reaction makes it so that you're more likely to have an impulse to do. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So you're aware of your own stuff, basically, right? If I know that I have a trigger in specific situations, that I know that if someone says something to me, that it will set me off.
At 64, I know every one of my triggers.
That's amazing, right? So that's number one. And if you didn't, and those people who don't, they're not going to, all the other domains that we're going to talk about, they're probably not going to do well. However, if you have high self-awareness, it actually, it increases your overall EQ in all the other domains as well. So basically you need to know what your actual, like when your feelings are stirred and what that causes as far as like impulses and reactivity. Okay. So the second one is that you have self-management. And self-management really is that when you're actually upset, when you're triggered, that you're able to contain yourself enough to focus on what you're doing in the moment, right? So you cannot obviously imagine that this is very important if you have a job to do. We all have jobs to do, right? If something happens that triggers you, you don't want to be like flipping desks, and you want to be able to contain yourself and manage yourself in the moment so that you can focus on what you're doing at hand and maybe process or deal with the emotions at a different time.
As we go to a break, I never flipped the desk, but I sure as hell thought about it a couple of times. I think everybody has.
Well, that's it.
You
Exactly.
get to the point you go, okay, don't throw the desk.
Right. We all have the thoughts. It's about what you do with those thoughts that matters, right?
All right, let's do this. We're going to take a short break. We're going to come back. It is about raising emotional intelligence. Don't go away. Today's social media segment is brought to you by Alford and Associates for all of your insurance needs. CIS, Cardiovascular Institute of the South, the highest quality cardiovascular care available. Barker Honda, the Barker family tradition of quality. All right, we're talking about raising emotional intelligence. Debbie Cox-DeNoble is taking us through all the things you need to know about that. And we left off, and we'll let you proceed.
Yeah, so we have 4 domains of emotional intelligence. And before the break, we went over the first 2, which is self-awareness and self-management. So how well do you know what triggers you? And are you aware of where your sort of quote unquote weaknesses are? And then self-management is, of course, how do you control yourself and when you're triggered? The third one is social awareness, and this comes down to empathy. So this is basically knowing how other people are being really good at perceiving how other people are thinking and feeling, but more than that, caring about how they think and feel. So this is a really important one, and we'll talk a little bit about what that comes down to, but basically it's empathy, right? So it's like understanding how someone else is, where they're coming from, and also having a heart for where they're coming from. And the final one is relationship management, and this is how you manage conflicts. So in conflicts, are you listening, basically, because a major pitfall when it comes to emotional intelligence is either an unwillingness or an inability to listen. And we've talked about this before, where we actually aren't taught in school, most of us, how to have really great listening skills. And listening, so most people listen from a space of like, is it my turn to talk yet? Or when is it my turn to talk? Or do I agree or do I disagree? Or is this wrong or is this right? Or is this bad or is this good? And that's not a clean listening space, because you're kind of coming from that judgmental place. But if you're able to actually hone in on how to listen from a clean space, to really actually listen, to understand, to get behind the eyes of the other person feels very seen and very heard, right? And they actually feel more connected to you. So being able to listen in conversation, according to Goldman, if you're not someone who listens well, and definitely start to pay attention to that. If you find yourself interrupting, talking over someone, if that's the feedback that you're getting, or you're listening from that place of judgmentalism about whether or not you're going to agree, he said, at first, it may feel very unnatural. But if you can actually really become a fantastic listener, this will help you in everything. He said he actually compared it to, it's kind of like you're coming in with your neuroplasticity to try to rewire yourself. And it will feel as unnatural if right now at home, if you're used to crossing your arms one way, and then you go to cross them the other way, and I actually just did the same thing because I'm so used to it, right? It will feel quite unnatural at first, but when you practice it over time, it'll just become your way of being.
Let me ask you something. There's 2 points I want to make. Self-awareness. When you're in a conversation and you sense that the other person is trying to say something and they're not listening to you, that's one of my triggers.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there going, they're not even hearing what the people are saying there. They're trying to get their story across, and they don't even know what the person is saying because they're not listening, trying to say how they're going to one-up them.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
And
And the second thing is empathy. I can take empathy, so I think I'm an empathetic person until you feel like you're being taken advantage of.
Yeah.
Some people use empathy, or they want to be treated with empathy because that's how they work.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think it's really important to, because I speak with a lot of people who are quite naturally empathetic, and there's a convolution there that they cannot be kind and empathetic and also have very strong and fierce boundaries, right? Because if someone's trying to take advantage of you, or if they're prone to taking advantage of people with open, caring, soft hearts, then you can actually become a victim just by virtue of. So it's really important for you to tease out and understand for yourself that you can be both, because if not, what happens is that the brain chooses being non-empathetic and protecting itself over being empathetic and being a victim. But it's important to recognize that you can actually come from a compassionate place and understand that someone is behaving in a certain way because of the traumas or the pains of their past, and that you need boundaries with this person because of their own pain, they're willing to take advantage of you if they possibly can.
Yeah, I guess my point is, growing up with, my mom was always so empathetic. And my dad was empathetic too, to a certain point.
Yeah.
And then, but he knew at what point to go, all right, Martin, enough.
Yeah.
Enough of the playing the little violin on the shoulder.
Yeah.
Get it done.
Yeah, and all of that signals high emotional intelligence. And one of the things Goleman says he likes to do is ask people, think about what makes a good leader. Think about in your mind who a good leader is to you, like an example of a good leader, and think of a bad leader. Okay, good leader, bad leader. He goes, whenever we tease it out, no matter who they choose for the good leader or the bad leader, what we find is that the good leader has high emotional intelligence and the bad leader has low emotional intelligence. Why? Because we talked about this before. This is true in primates as well. Wherever the leader is emotionally, it is actually more contagious to the people that they lead than if it's just two people average, right? The leader has a stronger influence emotionally. So if you have a leader who's prone to reactivity, who has a low emotional intelligence, what typically happens is that performance is lower. So if in a business situation, performance is lower, morale is lower, and they actually lose people faster because people are not, when they're emotionally low or where they're agitated, they just don't do well, right? Whereas if you think about a good leader, and someone says a good leader, an emotionally intelligent good leader makes you feel connected to, seen, heard, they're patient. You have an opportunity to ask questions where you don't understand, and you feel heard and you feel guided, so that there's clarity between you. So that's what makes people feel really good under someone, and they'll go above and beyond and all
I
of
got to work on the patience deal, because in the TV world, it's hard to have patience when you're on deadline over and over. You're going, oh, let's take our time, but we're going to have this in 10 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. It is very much something that you get to work on, because because the only time that you're actually going to be able to practice this is when the pressure is on, right? Because that's where the rubber meets the road, and emotional intelligence can really help you kick in, because there are feelings that we all have.
I find in hurricanes, I'm my most calmest.
See?
It's my place to relax. It's right here on the desk.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about everything else that's going on.
Amazing.
Focus on the matter at hand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, good topic.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
What's next week? Do we know yet?
We don't know yet.
All right. Give me a hint during the week. All right. We'll take a break, and we'll have more good vibes next week with Debbie Cox-DeNova, and we'll see you around the corner. Today's social media segment is brought to you by South Louisiana Bank. It's better when we bank together. Waits and Downer, attorneys at law. Terrebonne Ford, built Ford tough.